Hello everyone. A couple of weeks ago I asked on Twitter for some of your Mother series hot takes, and I got a lot of responses, so I'm gonna go through them and give my thoughts, whether I agree, disagreed, or feel somewhere in the middle. Just a heads up, I'm not gonna go over every single response I got, since there were a few where I either felt like I really just had nothing to say, or the take itself would be too much for me to go over during this one ensemble video, so nothing personal if you weren't covered. Spoiler warning for all three Mother games. Anyways, let's begin. Kim says, Mother 2 is the least interesting final boss story-wise, but the best final boss aura-wise. Aura meaning like vibes and spookiness, and how it makes you feel. While Gygus has that factor really well, I think it's the least interesting out of the three in terms of story to me. This is a good, agreeable one to start on, because yeah, I'd say overall the plot of Mother 2 is not as interesting to me as the plot in 1 or 3, and this of course extends to the final boss. Gygus in 2 is sort of just a thing in the background for the whole game, but you never really learn all that much about him, except that he's the embodiment of evil. Mother 1 has all that background with Queen Mary and Gygus that I can appreciate, and 3 speaks for itself, so I won't explain why I feel like that's more interesting story-wise right now. That said, yeah, Gygus in Mother 2 kinda does have the best vibes because there's a reason that Gygus is well known with so many people who aren't even Mother fans. Gygus's visuals are crazy iconic. Maya S'more says, Earthbound's inventory management / space is acceptable and adds a good gameplay wrinkle. Forcing the player to be mindful of the limited space in their bag makes each item feel like you need to find a purpose for it. I agree with this as well. Mostly. I see a lot of complaints from folks who play lots of RPGs that Earthbound should have the same storage system as every RPG where you're allowed to carry as many items as you want, but yeah, having to be more wise and not being able to stock up on like 30 multi-bottle rockets to cheese through the game, yeah, I don't mind that. I will say though that Mother 3 did improve on Earthbound's system with its key items menu, but that's a pretty cold take in of itself. Dr. Snows says, Earthbound has the worst story in the franchise. Yeah, I mean, if you had to rank them, I would say I agree, it's the least good story out of the 3 games. Oddly, you'll notice this opinion is actually not that big of a hot take in the fandom as of recent. Callum Buddy says, the opening hours of Earthbound Beginnings, up until you first talk to Lloyd, are the best part of the game. Oh, now that's a take. Because personally, I think the most fun part of Beginnings is both getting Teddy and then getting Eve. Teddy because when he's in your party, he starts hitting so hard compared to your other party members, and Eve for similar reasons. I think it's fun getting through all those crazy tough Manitoy enemies with either of them there to deal real damage. Not that there isn't fun to be had in the first few hours of the game, like when you get Pippi in your party for instance, but otherwise yeah, those later parts are what I would say is the best part of the game. The story stuff at that point too is awesome, so that contributes to it as well. Shane aka Coyote Cocktail says, fans love discussing all the creative / artistic aspects of Mother, but playing Dragon Quest made me realize my favorite thing about the first 2 games is that they are great dungeon crawlers. Maybe not a hot take, but I feel like their fundamentals as RPGs get overlooked. This one's interesting. I don't really know all that much about dungeon crawlers other than with the Mado Monogatari series, which most of those games are as dungeon crawly as you can get, but otherwise, yeah, the point that RPG fundamentals in the first 2 Mother games being overlooked, yeah, that's pretty true. Creative and artistic aspects of the games are obviously super interesting, but discussion of that stuff does sort of overshadow other aspects like their game design. Hell, I probably contribute to that overshadowing with the type of stuff I talk about in my videos. So, oops. Good take though. Monkeyness,
Hey, I know you!
says, seeing how Itoi said Mother 4 would be about romantic love, in junction with the dialogue at the very end of Mother 3, it definitely seems like Duster and Kumatora are canon. Oh boy. Monkeyness, I love you man, but I don't agree that Kumadust is canon. Like, for one thing, I'm not totally sure how the Mother 4 ideas that Itoi mentioned in a 2019 interview are connected to this, and the line of dialogue at the end of Mother 3, I do ultimately feel like it's just meant to be a playful hint. It doesn't specify anything deeper without getting into headcanon territory. So, to say it's canon, I'm definitely not going as far to say that. Insectoid Gigu says, I personally think Mother 2 is the worst one in the franchise when it comes to storytelling. No bias, trust. Yeah, once again I agree. I think 1 and 3 have a better story overall. Kyalone Mini says, I guess my hottest take is that unless someone can cite a source to me right now, we actually don't know what kind of information George stole from Gygas's people, like it might have not been PSI. Generally, we actually don't know a lot about this backstory for certain at all. Someone else actually made a point about this exact thing that I'll go over a bit more when I get to that. But for now, yeah, I don't think it was actually PSI itself that was stolen, since when you think about that for a minute, it sorta doesn't make any sense that he could steal that. Prez says, Lloyd is the best mother character. Well, only one mother character is the best in my eyes. But yeah, I like Lloyd too, he's awesome. I do actually like him more than Jeff actually. Lloyd isn't super popular relatively, but with Mother 1's popularity gradually increasing in the Western fandom, I've seen more and more people who like Lloyd, so this take isn't that hot anymore. It's a good take though. Veteran Mother fan and maker of the classic video Keck or Cringe with Duster, Megalo says, people don't consider the imagination aspect about the games enough when discussing the series. People want full remakes or say the characters need more personality, or say that Mother 3 is the only one with a good story, when in my opinion there's a lot of value in the games just being as they are, and leaving a lot of it up to your imagination. I personally think it's a big reason why the series meshes with so many people's hearts. Yeah, I think this is pretty true. I think one thing to keep in mind with this series is that Itoi is someone who likes to keep details vague, to make it so you can interpret certain things as canon, even though another player might not interpret those things the same way. And yeah, I agree, these games don't need remakes and all that stuff. I would change some things about Mother 3 personally, but I'll get into that later probably. CC says, Mother 1 is greater than 2, which is greater than 3. Well, that sure is a hot take. I don't agree, I would ultimately order the games in the opposite ranking. Chloean, awesome profile picture by the way, says, the random encounters in Mother 1 are not that bad. I mean, they kinda are. Well, not really. In the context of a game released in 1989, back when you didn't have a million things to grab your attention, like a phone with an app spouting short-form content for you to stare at for hours every day, yeah, it was probably not that boring having such a piecemeal way of leveling up via random encounters being so common. But yeah, kind of a hot take. Happy Lovelies 99 says, Porky is a very tragic character that is grossly misunderstood by the Western fanbase as inherently/born evil, when in reality he's a kid who has been abused his whole life and was preyed upon by an alien that corrupts people by strengthening the darkness in their hearts. I think analysing the entireties of Porky's character in this video might be biting off a bit more than I can chew, but to summarise my thoughts, yeah, I mostly agree. But I do think Porky is meant to have some degree of inherent, dormant evil in his character that does ultimately lead him down the path he takes, and there's meant to be some commentary on how power does corrupt and turn innocent people into monsters, but I suppose my take here is probably more of a hot take than the comment I'm analysing. But anyways, Netherite Axe says, Facade is actually a pretty cool character, but has very little appearances of his lore, unless you search for them, and still they can be overlooked easily. I would have liked a bit more emphasis in his story, but yeah, cool. Like, we don't know if he chose to turn evil or he got brainwashed like others. I think it's kinda open and no one speaks of him, which makes me sad. Also, I love the Mother 3 combo mechanic, and more games should make musical combos a thing. Mostly good take, I think, but this goes back into the point about Itoi liking leaving details vague for the fans to come up with their own conclusions for, but you did mention it being unknown as to what caused him to become evil, so yeah. I do think Facade is a great character for what he represents and his role in the story. As for the Mother 3 combo mechanic, I also love that shit, but I have bad news regarding it showing up in any other games, considering Nintendo has a patent for the mechanic. But as of the current year of 2025, the patent might have expired, since these patents typically last 20 years, and it was filed in 2005, so... Colin says, Mother 1, with the information from the official encyclopedia, has the most interesting story in the series. I still think Mother 3 is the most interesting story to me, with its scraps of supplemental material included, but yeah, Mother 1's story with the boost of the encyclopedia is super duper cool. No lie there. Baku Kirby says, while I love the game, I think even if it got past localization untouched, Mother 3 being released in the US won't be a big deal anymore as it would have been years ago, and might be a bad idea because one of two things. One, to port it as is, ignoring the copyright and cultural changes, would be too polarizing nowadays, and with how people took and memed the recent Pokemon leaks, it'd probably be worse to try at all to retain it as is. And two, to change what would need to be could very well leave the core audience disappointed, and if it gains any traction, it'll spread to either the game not staying true to its vision, or Mother fans might look like they don't care about some of the problematic content in the game. For a lot of people outside looking in, which there would be by virtue of the meme of Mother 3 localized, somewhat surpassing the notoriety of the series itself. I wouldn't consider that there a hot take exactly. But let me explain what I know about a hypothetical Mother 3 localization. The contents of Mother 3 changing in a localization is not something that would ever happen. If there were changes that were needed, then a localization would just not happen. The folks at Hobonichi, including Itoi, wouldn't want their vision compromised and just allow that to happen. There's a lot of specific stuff I could say regarding the game's content and why you don't need to fear that there's these crazy reasons why localization never happened, but what's most concise of me to say is that people want some sort of crazy satisfying narrative for why Mother 3 isn't localized, when in reality it's so much more unsatisfying than most people want it to be. Fans of Mother 3, rightfully so, love the game, so the idea that it's just this product that NOA sees as a dead-end thing that's hardly worth the profit it would generate seems upsetting, but that's sorta just how it is. Anyways, I'm getting off track. Yeah, I 100% agree with the part about a lot of outsiders only caring about the game by virtue of the localized Mother 3 meme. That would definitely suck. Spongy Brain says, Mother 3 is the most overrated game ever. It's not a bad game, but people hype it up like it's the second coming of Christ. Mother 3 is of course my favourite game of all time, and I would even go as far as to say it did change my life, but I don't entirely disagree with this take. Like, some fans of the game I've noticed just will not accept that this game isn't completely flawless, and there is room to criticize things regarding it, as there is with any video game. I obviously love the game as a work of art, but yeah, it is kinda overrated in a way, to some degree. That said, I don't agree that much with this take though. It is absolutely not the most overrated game ever. Gravity says, the EarthBound series is represented perfectly and rather generously in Smash, and I don't think the series needs another representative. Many of the common Mother series characters I see requested, Porky-Mech, Maskman, etc., also don't feel like they'd fit Smash very well. If anything, I'd love to see more locations in 3D, or creative items like the Ramblin' Evil Mushroom, and of course music, but I'm perfectly content with Ness and Lucas as the sole playable characters. I'll still pop off if/when they added anything at all though. Not a bad take. I think most of you probably know my thoughts about the Mother content in Smash from that video I made a couple of years ago, but otherwise, I don't necessarily think another character from the series needs to be added to Smash. But it'd be cool though. And yeah, I totally agree, it'd be nice to see more stages and music from all three Mother games. I suppose this is a little bit of a hot take, since most people tend to want Smash games to have as much content as possible from the series as they like. Haha. Joseph says, I don't need EarthBound 64 to be found. It's a far more interesting game to talk about and speculate on as a piece of vaporware. It's the mystery that makes the game so fascinating. Finally, I can talk about EB64. I don't agree with this take since the game was never finished, so even if we had a prototype, there'd still be so much mystery since there'd be a lot of empty parts that we'd only have bits and pieces to, and we'd have to speculate from there. Also, I need it to be found just in general because I want to play what they did finish of it so bad. But yeah, this is definitely a hot take since almost all Mother fans, regardless of their thoughts on EB64, do want to see it be found. Ariel GLR says, Mother 1 is the best game to receive a remake than 2, story and gameplay wise. Not exactly a hot take, but I don't disagree. I don't think Mother 2 needs a remake at all, and while I don't think Mother 1 needs one either, if I had to pick between two games to receive one for some reason, it'd obviously go to Mother 1. Taki says, I'm glad Mother 64 designs never came to be. They're quite ugly, besides Flint.
No.
This isn't particularly a hot take since EB64's character designs are still not particularly well liked in the wider Mother fandom, but in case my opinions weren't obvious, no, I don't agree that designs are ugly. I think everyone, not just Flint, looks pretty cool. I love Lucas and Duster and Kumatora's designs, for instance, among many of the others. Hell, it's why I also commissioned this N64 Boney plushie too. Klaus says, Mother 3 should not be localized at this point unless there would be a full remake, maybe a la Link's Awakening / Pokemon BDSP. I wouldn't consider this too much of a hot take either. I see this sentiment actually fairly often these days. That said, I do agree I don't really think Mother 3 should get a localization at this point, but I do not want it to be in the style anywhere close to the Link's Awakening or Pokemon BDSP style. I just do not think those visuals would suit Mother 3's tone, or the game in general, really. C3 Plays says, Mother 1 should get remade and get a localization, because it feels like not enough people can play the original one. Huh? I'm assuming you don't mean enough people can play it via its distribution, because nah, that game is pretty easily accessible now via NSO, but if you mean not enough people can play it because of how the game is made, well, I hate to say it, but it is literally a game made in 1989, and not everyone is going to be able to enjoy a game that was made with the standards video games had back then. I guess a remake would make more people be inclined to check out the game, but I feel like there's always just going to be an uphill battle when it comes to getting people to play Mother 1, remake or not. Also, I feel Mother Encore fills in that niche of a Mother 1 remake, even if it does stray from the original game to some degree, and also will probably take another 7 years at least to be completed. Apollo says, The Mother 3 bestiary sucks. Have you tried getting it 100% full? With all the back sprites and such, it's such an insane task for some reason, and I feel like it's not even possible. I remember seeing some enemies that can't be turned around having a back sprite in there, but maybe I was just not sharp enough to think of a way. Either way, it's annoying how you can obtain some back sprites chapters after finding an enemy. It feels like you must be a Mother 3 Mega Pro nerd to fulfill that, cause otherwise I don't know how anyone is supposed to obtain a 100% full bestiary. It really beats me. I think this is a hot take just by virtue of I've never seen anyone state this take before. I'm inclined to agree with this though. I can't imagine how much of a waste of time it'd try to be to fully fill out the battle memory in Mother 3 with all those back sprites. But to be fair, they only added a little achievement denoting that you completed the battle memory in the fan translation. It's not as if the original devs for Mother 3 ever intended for it to be something that you should reasonably do. Best of luck to you trying to get that 100% though. Ninja Nerd says, Porky is annoying and unlikable. Picky is the superior brother. Finally, someone said it. In all seriousness though, yeah, Porky being annoying and unlikable is pretty much the point, and poor Picky is just an innocent kid we don't really learn much about. So I wouldn't say this is a big hot take really, considering most players tend to like Picky better just by virtue of him not being a jerk. Dreamcaster says, just because Mother 3 is the best story in the series doesn't make it the best game in the series. That award goes to Mother 2. While Mother 3 is hugely popular with Western fans now, it's not as if Mother 2 isn't seen as the best game in the series by many Westerners still, so I'd say this is only a little bit of a hot take. Personally, if you take the stories out of the equation for both games to judge them, I can kinda understand thinking Mother 2 is the better game. It does have a lot of things Mother 3 doesn't have, but at the same time, Mother 3 has way more things I favour that 2 doesn't have, like rhythm battles and more impactful music in general. Rockoff says, Mother 3 is the worst game in the series sprite-wise, because not only did they get rid of the isometric-ish perspective the previous 2 games had, they also made the sprites way too readable. I believe the ambiguity is what made Mother 2's visuals perfect. Yeah, I can agree with this. Mother 3's overly clean style doesn't have the same appeal that Mother 2's kinda amateurish sprites have, and as you said, that ambiguity really does add something. I think it's kind of a hot take in of itself to not see Mother 3's visuals as the peak visuals for the series, especially considering most Mother fan games seem to try to build off of Mother 3's visuals instead of building off anything else, but I digress. Ars Tavial says, the identity of the masked man in Mother 3 was so laughably obvious, it kinda took me out of the game in general. Also, bottle rockets in EarthBound are too powerful and ruin the game once you learn that fact. I actually see a lot of people who share a similar-ish sentiment regarding that first part with the masked man, but in my humble opinion, I believe the intention of the developers was to not particularly make it difficult to figure out as the player who he was, but instead to try and empathize with how the playable characters must feel, from their perspective figuring it out who it is. I do agree 100% though, that bottle rockets totally break battles in EarthBound, and I kinda think that they're worth avoiding unless you're really struggling with the game. But weirdly enough, I don't see too many people that share that sentiment, so I suppose that's another hot take. Lunkhead says, Mother 3's ending is awful. The world ends and that's it. Very little closure as to what truly happened, and is one of those stupid, use your imagination endings. Really out there comparison, but I feel like Stone Ocean did this type of ending 50 times better. Now here's a spicy take. Alright, well, I'm not a JoJo's fan, so I can't comment on how that may or may not have handled a similar ending better, but I will say that while I don't think Mother 3's ending is perfect, I do think the sentiment it shares about questioning how our world will be okay or not is particularly powerful and seems to get more and more relevant as the years go on, I'd say. And for that alone, what they did with the ending could never be considered awful by me. Fellow Puyo Puyo YouTuber Mod Marmano says, Earthbound is the least engaging to me, and part of me feels like that maybe I don't have the right brain for it, or that I find Mother 1 and Mother 3 more narratively engaging, and they definitely have more for me with soundtracks. Weirdly enough, this sentiment becomes less and less of a hot take over time, since I've seen so many people in the past couple of years that love Mother 1 and 3 but don't really feel much regarding 2. And yeah, I sorta get it. Mother 1 and 3 have narratives that engage with me personally more than what 2 has. That's all for what was on Twitter, but I also asked on the non-Deadbeat Father Run app for people to submit hot takes there too, so I'll go over all those now as well. Snail says, Mother 1 is good and deserves a playthrough despite its age. Only a slight hot take since within the community Mother 1 continues to get more and more recognition, but I agree either way. Sir Do says, I personally think Mother 1 is just as charming, if not more charming than the other 2 games, mainly in its vibes, music, and pixel art. This is the type of take that more people in the community tend to agree with from the recent years of discussion I've observed and taken part in, but I will say, I don't think using the word charm specifically is a great way to describe something. Charm is kind of an arbitrary term that sorta doesn't mean much in my opinion, but I do agree with this take overall. I think Mother 1 has a lot to enjoy about it, like the other 2 games have. Nalay says, PK Beam is not as interesting of a PSI attack people think it is. It's just a prototype of what PK Rockin' and PK Love would be. The only thing of note is that Ana uses it, not Ninten, as well as appearing in the commercial. That's about it really. This is definitely a hot take since I don't really see anyone say this, but I agree completely with this take. It feels like PK Beam literally does only get attention because it's the one offensive PSI move, not in Mother 2 or 3, but only in Mother 1 instead. It's really not anything super duper special. Even in Mother 1 itself, it's not the best PSI move Ana has. Ashley says, I don't really care that Mother 3 hasn't gotten officially localized. The game has been fan translated for over a decade now, and it's of such high quality that it may as well be official. This one's funny because it gradually becomes less and less of a hot take over time, and if anything, I feel like this is the most sensible and reasonable view to have regarding Mother 3's localization status. I completely agree with this one. Miles Sunny says, this will be funny AF because I'm in the EB64 server, but I don't believe EB64 is this mythical superior product that fixes all of Mother 3's problems. There's a lot that if they made it into the final GBA game could have enhanced it, but I don't think it would be superior to what we got as some fans believe. I am satisfied and happy with the Mother 3 we have, and I'd rather focus on that than what could have been. Despite liking all the things we know about the canned 64 game, and all the Uto art, this one's kinda sorta hot take, but my gut tells me it isn't really. Because the vast majority of Mother fans do not agree with that sentiment that EB64 would have one way or another fixed problems that GBA Mother 3 has, or more accurately, not have had those problems in the first place, but instead, most people tend to think the game would have been of worse quality than what the GBA version is. The reason also I don't necessarily think this is a hot take is because most EB64 fans themselves don't really ever think of it as a mythical superior product either. It's a very rare opinion in this fandom. But I appreciate you also like Ito's art too, I love it as well. Godsend Mother Series researcher Biozilla says, while the variety in locales is a highlight of the game, I would say that EarthBound doesn't quite succeed at presenting a globetrot, or a climax where the whole world comes together to save the day. The majority of the game is spent in basically US and Europe, It's possible that the southern hemisphere is unvisited. I feel that the criticism is justified by the emphasis placed on Ness's destiny overlapping with everyone else's. EB is my fave game, but I'm disappointed by this aspect. This is weirdly enough another hot take because despite me personally agreeing fully, I never see anyone else sharing this sentiment anywhere. As a Mother fan from that oh-so-mysterious southern hemisphere, yeah, it's kinda disappointing that this entire region of the world isn't represented in what is said to be a globe-trotting adventure. Justin, aka Psy64, aka Goemon.fan2002 at yahoo.com, aka Explosions, says, I don't think another Mother game after 3 would be as bad of an idea as people make it out to be, in the context of it being a completely separate story from 3. I think Itoi's love story and original detective concept would work fine, for as much as I emphasized before that I really wouldn't want to see official remakes of the Mother games. If for some reason Itoi decided he wanted to make a Mother 4 that he would write for, I'd think that'd actually be pretty cool. The fact he has ideas for a 4th game is enough for me to be interested, even if it really will never actually happen. So yeah, I agree with this hot take. Anonymous Buddy left a bunch of ones, so let's rapid fire through these. 3 is the weakest in the series. Once again, I don't agree with that, but it's a take that becomes more and more accepted as time goes on in this fandom. 3's original GBA look is the best iteration of the game's art style. That's a take alright. People tend to really dislike that style, so it's funny to see someone who likes this style best. Sandhop's one translation is way better than Tomatoes. I think the Mado translation is generally seen as the superior version, so this leans to being a hot take, but I do agree with this one. Sandhop's translation is better in my opinion. Adding a run button to 2 is sacrilegious. Yeah, I agree here as well. It really isn't necessary. I'm sick of artists portraying Mother characters in the Peanuts art style. I agree as well. Like, no harm to the artists who do this still, but it's pretty overused in fan art. Boney should have learned PSI. This would have been funny. I mean, it would explain why he's a part of Lucas's Final Smash and Smash Ultimate if he did have PSI. George did not steal PSI. If anything, he stole Eve's schematics. I don't get where the conception that George stole psionic powers from aliens and somehow spread them to the children of the world actually came from, but it's a weirdly contentious topic. This was what I was alluding to before with the George take, but yeah, this makes way more sense than him stealing PSI. I agree completely, even though, yeah, it's a weirdly contentious topic. Grinding for the Sword of Kings is stupid. And yeah, I mean the 1 in 128 chance of getting it in such a tiny segment of the game does make me feel like it's a pretty stupid thing to grind for unless you really want to be a completionist. I know I wasted too many hours trying to do it myself. Clark says, a lot of fans dislike how Mother 3 is so different from Mother 2, but I think it's awesome. In my opinion, Mother 1 is also very unlike the other two in its tone and storytelling. It's cool having a little anthology game series, where each installment stands on its own, and even exists in its own world. Mother games are united by their overarching themes, like growing up, the power of human compassion, familial love, which each game explores in new ways. They don't have to follow the same plot or characters, or even tell the same kinds of stories, to keep building on those messages. I love that. Itoi was really bold to craft each game as its own thing in my opinion, rather than rehashing through the obligatory stuff you'd expect of a sequel. Dude wasn't making a franchise, he was making art. Each game resonates with different players in different ways, because they're all such unique experiences. TLDR hot take. I think some fans just wanted Mother to be a series of endlessly repetitive EarthBound-esque adventures, kinda like how Pokemon rehashes the same stuff over and over. Nostalgic comfort food. But that was never Itoi's vision, and in my opinion, Mother as a whole is much stronger for it. Yes! 100% I completely agree with this. If anything, I would have liked if Mother 3 had been even more different. I mean, look at how much I love EB64 and its visuals compared to how the final game looks. But yeah, the Mother games all being their own little things that don't continue to be pumped out with rehashed characters and set pieces, I appreciate that. They stand up on their own and don't need to be retold pretty much again and again like how Pokemon is. Poor Bree Brace says, not sure how relevant this take is anymore, but I don't think EarthBound would look good in HD 2D as I saw quite a few people suggesting back in 2017 to 2018. Chrono Trigger on the other hand, this is sort of a hot take. I'd say typically most general Mother fans would be cool with a 2D HD Mother game remake, but yeah, I agree here, that really would not be great. I don't like how 2D HD looks. Gentle Ghost says, the lack of character interaction in Mother 1 and 2 is more of a strength than a hindrance. While the subtext in both games indicate personalities with the cast, especially with Mother 1 with more defined motivations, the lack of explicit personalities allow more role-playing elements from the player. I'd say this is somewhat of a hot take since people tend to enjoy coming up with their own headcanon interactions for the playable characters, but at the same time, many players also wish that they had more defined personalities and character moments, but I think this ultimately comes down to personal preference of the player. Thane Gaming says, Mother 2's writing is great of course, but I think it has the weakest overall story of the trilogy. It does an especially bad job at being a sequel to 1 in that regard. Yig's transformation between games makes little sense, for example. Once again, Mother 2's story is being regarded as the least good of all the Mother games. You are certainly not alone with that sentiment, Thane. I will say that I personally just hand-wave away the Gygas stuff by saying that Mother 1 and 2 take place in separate dimensions, and it's actually both games just happen to have two versions of the same character from alternate dimensions, but that's getting into headcanon territory. Earth and Space says, Mother 1 has better characters / story than its sequel, and to be honest, I believe Mother 2 / EarthBound to be more so the outlier in spirit and tone in the trilogy versus the others. Well, there's that sentiment again about Mother 1 having a better story, but yeah, I think the part about Mother 2 being the outlier game in the trilogy is a bit of a hot take though. Most people tend to think of 3 as the outlier, and for understandable reasons. But yeah, I kinda agree 2 is the outlier game, since in my view, it is sort of a loose reimagining of Mother 1 with lots of new stuff included, while 1 and 3 sorta stand up as their own more unique adventures. Batdog Duke says, as we know, there was clearly more plans for King to have some kind of further involvement in EarthBound. I think it was a bad decision to cut that concept. I do not find EarthBound's start to be difficult, but to an inexperienced player, it can be a nightmare. I think King should have stuck through the entirety of On It. Then, by the time Ness leaves south to head to Tucson, Ness's family should have stopped him, King would leave the party, and they'd bid Ness a farewell as he'd move on with his journey. The transition from On It to Tucson feels like a moment where I personally feel nothing special, other than when the Tucson music hits. So adding the additional King gameplay plus the scene with Ness's family, and more like said cutscene idea, would have made EarthBound feel like a proper story. Most of the time, EarthBound is a very point A, point B in my opinion. This is a super interesting take. I've never seen anyone make these points before. I think ultimately I agree. It would have been neat having King there for the entirety of On It. And yeah, a lot of players tend to find the stuff in On It to be fairly tough since Ness is still fairly weak. And obviously King isn't very strong or helpful either, but having him there might have just balanced things just a tad more in the player's favour. I should be done now, but there were a few people who wanted to write in submissions who didn't send theirs in via Twitter or Blue Sky, so here they are. Jimmy says, the photo guy isn't annoying and you're all just impatient. Huh. Now that I think about it, I have seen more than a few people complain about the photo guy interrupting the game whenever he shows up, but I can't say it's a super duper common complaint, but I do agree that people annoyed by that are totally impatient. Ven says, Mother 3's writing, in its current form, is a bit of a letdown. I think the backstory they built is pretty interesting, and a lot of the characters have promise. I mean, I think the stuff with Lucas's family and the Masked Man is pretty good too, but outside of that, it really leaves a lot to be desired. I think the way they had a giant info dump of the background explanation in the last chapter is a little bit lazy, and it could have been integrated in a more cohesive way throughout the story. Also, unlike the last Mother games, they try to give their characters more detailed backgrounds, but they don't really capitalize on this in any meaningful way. Particularly, Duster and Kumatora are really in need of further exploration. Kumatora is the worst offender, getting almost nothing in depth in the version of Mother 3 we got, leaving her kind of hollow. It seems like they were trying to take the Mother 2 approach of leaving the characters more open to interpretation, but it doesn't work as well when you already have defined backstories and personalities for them. Now this is a great take in my eyes, and I mostly agree with this, even though I'd say yeah, this is pretty spicy overall because it really goes against that thing about people tending to view Mother 3 as perfect, but let's not dwell on that. Anyways, I do think Letta's info dump is a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, I totally agree, it could have been integrated a lot more cohesively, other than the sporadic hints to stuff mentioned in it much earlier in the game, and the game as a result having it all be an info dump is admittedly bizarre. On the other hand though, I sorta get it that all this lore info is ultimately not that important in the grand scheme of things. Like, that's meant to be the point of all this being told to you, and yet you really don't have the time or energy to process it. That said, I lean more into the side of wanting it to have been handled differently, as in, I think it would have been more interesting plot-wise if it had been more important earlier on in the story and was built up to more. And yeah, I completely agree with the point about the game not fully capitalizing on character backgrounds, and while I think a lot of characters suffer that, Duster and especially Kumatora are two big victims of it. I believe in my Mother Games ranking video I make the same point about how I feel like having the approach from the previous games of open to interpretation characters is nice and all, but this is something that only really starts like halfway through the game. The first half has a lot more defined character for all the protagonists. I have no issue how these chapters utilize and set up character backgrounds, since it feels like everything is established so well and things are super well defined, so the fact the game drops this to a fairly major extent around chapters 5 and 7 I feel is disappointing, and part of why I feel like these chapters are the weaker ones of the game. Also, as a side note, in regards to the point before about Letta's info dump, I wish certain things had been elaborated on more, specifically with character backgrounds. You mean to tell me Letta has things to say about Duster, Wes, and Kumatora, but nothing to say to Lucas about either of his parents? Whatever. I didn't intend to rant about Mother 3 so much there. I'll make up for that. I saved the hottest take for last, so let's get to it. Finally, from the Goodman himself, Benici says, I think people heavily over-exaggerate how sad Mother 3 is to an unbelievable degree. Mother 3 has some sad moments, don't get me wrong, but honestly they're like only 1% of the game. Hell, I'd say they're more so like 0.1% of the game. Hinawa's death was sad, sure, but that's really the only moment I can see people getting reasonably sad over. Other moments like the twins' reunion and the ending, however, I just can't see it. With the former example, I feel like there's really next to nothing emotional about it in-game. You could say Hinawa trying to make Klaus remember is emotional, but it honestly doesn't feel that way. It doesn't also help how literally no one in-game, and not even his literal dad, reacts to his death in any significant way. Onto the latter one, I've seen quite a few people literally tearing up over the ending, and that's the one thing that's confusing me. There's nothing sad about it. The story up to that point has done nothing to develop my connection with the world or the characters, further to the point I'd get sad over it going away. And even then, the way it's presented in-game does not help to make it sad. It definitely could have helped if it made use of dialogue, honestly. Wow. There's a lot to unpack here. You absolutely get the hottest take award, Benici, my friend. But I do not really agree with any of this take, and I'll go over why. Firstly, I don't think people necessarily exaggerate how sad the game made them feel, since sadness is such a difficult emotion to fake. I feel like people can sometimes use their words in ways that try to get across a certain viewpoint they have, even if emotionally speaking, their logical response doesn't align 100% with their emotional response. But people usually really mean earnestly how their emotions were affected when they express how sad something made them feel, which in this context, no, I don't feel like people are exaggerating how sad they feel Mother 3 is. People tend to walk away from this game thinking back on plenty of sad parts. That said, Mother 3 does have plenty of sad stuff other than Hinawa's death. All the stuff related to it too, like Flint's breakdown, Lucas being scolded by Alec, Klaus's death and disappearance. That's all stuff that upsets most players, and I think is sad too. That's not even getting into other stuff in the story that's not related, like Wes's treatment of Duster, all the stuff with Salsa, and the Tazmily villagers succumbing to corruption. Regarding Hinawa and Klaus, even though you don't see them much, it's more important to empathize with Lucas and Flint, since you see the world through their perspective when you play as them, as opposed to just feeling bad with characters you know personally. And that too is why the ending hits so hard for so many people. One of the main themes of Mother 3, I'd say, is empathy. I also want to point out my takeaway regarding the scene of Klaus's death. I'm not someone who I think could really put into words eloquently and intelligently why I feel like Flint's dialogue about Klaus at that point is so masterful and impactful, but I'll try to explain it best I can. Flint's involvement in much of Mother 3's story is about never giving up on hope that a missing loved one can be found. no matter how many people in his community find him to be foolish and obsessive for his dedication. And in those final moments of Klaus's life, Flint has accomplished what he has set out to do. He found his missing son, and the devastation of losing said son, but now permanently, must be insurmountable. And yet, there's no hatred or anger in Flint's heart at that moment, only gratefulness for his son Lucas helping end this suffering, for not just Klaus, and not just for Lucas himself, who no longer has to keep fighting, but Flint too, the suffering of trying to carry on after having lost one of his sons. And in addition, he only wants Lucas to feel the same way, to not hold feelings of bitterness and contempt towards his brother for everything that had transpired, to simply forgive him for being hasty. It's such a brilliant contrast in reactions to Flint learning when Hinawa dies, versus seeing Klaus die. There's no reason anymore to break down in anger. At that point, all the grief that he might have felt in that moment is less important than showing his true love for his whole family, and it's so masterfully portrayed with just 3 short sentences. So, with that in mind, do I agree that Klaus's dad doesn't react to Klaus's death in any significant way? No, not really. That all said, I do agree that yes, some more dialogue may have helped, that or just more expressive animations of the characters interacting, which would have been difficult to manage on the GBA with its limited visuals, but you know. My personal nitpicks aside though, just out of curiosity I did ask Benichi what he'd change about the final battle, and he made a point saying, I feel like it would have definitely helped if Lucas talked during it, which I think that too is a take I've seen regarding Mother 3 that isn't particularly uncommon, but is worth discussing since yeah, a lot of people seem to have wanted more dialogue out of Lucas, particularly during such an important part of the game, but I feel like this discussion is probably better saved for another video. I think I'll leave this video off with a hot take from myself that ties into this last submitted take I just went over. I think one thing that sorta colours my view on critical analysis of Mother 3's tone is the player's emotional maturity, and this isn't to say anything bad about Benichi specifically or anything, but it's my understanding that he played the game at a younger age. Mother 3 I feel is a game best saved when you're old enough to have strong emotional maturity, and this isn't just me talking out of my ass. Itoi himself in 2019 literally said that the game is best saved for when you're older. I'm not trying to suggest anything about perceptions people would have about this game if they first played through it at a younger age, but I do think that sentiment that the game is best enjoyed when you're older is very true, and while this isn't exactly an easy thing to encourage or discourage, I think whomever waits to play Mother 3 until they're an adult will enjoy and appreciate it more for its themes and tone than they would have enjoyed it as a young teen. Alright, that's enough rambling for one video, I'll end it here. I want to thank everyone who submitted their takes for me to go over in this video, regardless of whether it was hot or not. Without your input, I would have never been able to make this video. Perhaps if enough of you viewers enjoy this type of video, I'll make another one going over more hot takes about these games. So leave a like and click subscribe if you want to show your interest. I'm sure this goes without saying, but also feel free to leave a comment with your Mother series hot takes, and I might even cover it in an aforementioned sequel video to this.